Hello and welcome to a fully packed stack. We look at who are the people shaping the media business today. Plus, a brand new magazine looking at Latin America. The editor-in-chief of Marie Claire US and Blake Abbie from a magazine curated by. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show featuring a brand new magazine about Latin America. It's called Latim Love. It's a joyous new publication by Bruna Castro and Rafaela Cardial. It aims to shine a spotlight on the new symbolic, narrative, and visual languages created by Latin Americans, with texts in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. It was a pleasure to speak with my fellow Brazilian, Bruna Castro. The name is fantastic already, and I love the concept and idea behind of the magazine. But Bruna, my first question is a very basic one. You need to give us an introduction to such a beautiful title, which is described as a Latin American magazine.
Oh my God. Hi. Nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited, a little nervous, but excited to give my very first interview in English. Latim Love is a fresh magazine with 164 pages of delicious knowledge. And it exists to bring voices, stories, and Latin American aesthetics together in one place. It is a magazine, obviously, so we mixed different formats and densities of content. And yeah, we're crossing many borders to do that. Linguistic borders, financial barriers to exist, but we are here. And yeah, we're launching this month, which is really, really exciting. So actually, we started to ship all the magazines this week. So it's fresh after 3 years of intense work.
You know what I love as well, Bruna, because you are from Brazil, correct? And it's interesting because even in one of the first pages, I think, if not the very first page of the magazine, there is a piece of artwork saying, in 2050, we discovered Brazil is Latin America. Because sometimes, Brazilians and vice versa, we feel kind of isolated perhaps from Latin America. But I think that's changing. And I think a magazine like Latim Love is the perfect example of that, right?
Totally. It is definitely changing. We believe that. And that's why we're making this magazine as well. That said, we felt that it was important to address that in our first edition. Also, it's a huge challenge to cover a huge and diverse territory. And we still don't know how we're going to do that. We're trying our best. Obviously, the first edition has a lot of Brazil because I'm Brazilian. So it was easier to access a broader network to collaborate in the first edition that, by the way, was done without funding and all of that. But also, Brazil being such a huge country, we are responsible to open our borders. We are responsible to open our territory to what is produced in other countries of Latin America. So I love the embroidery that is like a flag that Randolfo did. And he was very kind to let us use this amazing work because, so the prophecy is in 2050, we're going to discover that Brazil is Latin America, but then we answer in the magazine. I think we already know that in 2025. I'm very happy with that. And I'm happy if Latim Love, if our magazine can, contribute to building bridges across all these countries. That's one of the goals of this publication.
And I like that it's a title for all. For example, of course, there are texts in Portuguese, in Spanish, but also in English. And I think it's quite interesting because it's not just perhaps to Latin America. I mean, even yourself, you're based in Lisbon, in Europe. But perhaps people from other cultures can also, if they are interested in the continent, perhaps as well, right?
100%. And maybe I would like to tell a little bit the backstory of why we decided to create this magazine. So when I first moved to Lisbon in 2017, I went to this small, charming, independent magazine store. And it was the first time I saw such thing. I was like, what? There's a market for independent magazines? Because I was into independent publications, but not exactly magazines. And then I recall buying Safar, I guess.
Great title.
And I was like, interesting. So there are like other magazines covering territories, right? Then I remember, I think I bought also Badland, which was about the Balkan world. So I was like, where's the Latin American one? And I'm not saying that we are the only magazine that exists talking about that. But for example, Balam, which is a really good example, but they are like queer photography and it's different from Safar. So, and I'm a writer. So I was like, I don't want my magazine to be focused solely on photography or visuals. And then because I immigrated like 8 years ago, I've been living in Lisbon. I also lived in New York for 2 years. I started to like get into all the magazine shops that I could. And I am a little provocative when I get in. I'm like, hi, which titles do you have that aren't European? And then they're like, oh, there's this one from Japan. There's this one. Oh, there's one from Latin America. So I was like, cool. I want Latin Love to be next to these other amazing titles. So that's why we exist. And obviously, I would love this magazine to be more broadly distributed in Latin America. But to be honest, I'm here and I'm also focusing on the diasporas, but also on everyone else who are interested in... Como fala, tipo, que eu preciso de ajuda? Tipo, bebendo de outras inspirações, né? Que não sejam eurocêntricas.
Taking the font from other cultures as well, Something like that. One thing that, besides the amazing stories, the content, I mean, visually, the magazine is striking. And the cover is very powerful because, if you don't know the real story you see, I mean, it's a very beautiful, it's the image of a girl, kind of a picture, I presume, from the 80s. So tell us more about that choice for the cover because, it's quite a powerful, emotionally one.
I would say the cover was probably the first thing that we already knew, was like this needs to be our cover because when we came across this project called Retratistas do Morro, and back then I was living in New York and I also got to know another project called Nueva Yorkinos. So I was like, these two projects are documenting historically invisible communities, both in New York. So it's like the Nueva Yorkinos works with archive portraying the Latin American Caribbean diaspora in New York. And Retratistas do Morro is using archive from the Aglomerado da Serra, which is the largest favela from Belo Horizonte. They basically found 200,000 films of photos made by two photographers from the community. So it's a very special archive. So then we basically reached out to both projects, Nueva Yorkinos and Retratistas do Morro. And Retratistas do Morro, like Guilherme, which is, I'll say, the founder, he gave us access to the whole archive. So we spent like days on Google Drive seeing every image. And then when we came across the photo of Cristina, also the way Guilherme organizes the archive, it's incredible because you can open the picture and right next to it, you can see a transcription of an interview with the photographer. So we could have a background of like, who are these people? Because we need to name these people, not only see these people. Who are they? What are the stories behind? So then when we saw, wow, this is a Black woman that died because of an abortion with 17 years old in Brazil, a country where the abortion is still illegal, which like not many people know that. It's like, this has to be the cover. So we're basically just doing what Retratistas do Morro is doing. Is just a continuation, like we need this archive to be seen from like broader audiences. So it was a really easy choice. I mean, it was not easy to choose the best photo because we saw hundreds. But yeah, and I think here it's when, sometimes it's a very intuitive choice. I felt very emotional when I saw her picture.
No, same here. It's very interesting. Tell us about the title, Latin Love, because of course, it's not Latin Love with an N at the end, it's with an M. So I think you're being a little bit playful there. I think it plays with the fluidity of the title, right?
Yeah. So, okay. There's so many stories. The thing is, when I moved to Europe, I remember I was drunk at this bar and I told my friend, we should create an agency and it should be called Latin Lover because we're never going to work like them. We're different, whatever. But then I went back home and I was like, I mean, this is a very stereotyped association, the Latin Lover, which I don't mind playing with it eventually.
Same.
But, and this is like the part that non-Portuguese speakers or English speakers, it's hard to grasp it. Like in Portuguese, if you add the M instead of the N at the end, we are referring to Latin languages. So Latin with an M at the end refers to the Latin languages. So it's all about that. And the magazine has a lot of like essays talking about languages, the mixes between Portuguese and Spanish that is spoken in the borders, or Portuguese, which is the second article from João Nin. So yeah, that's why it's Latin Love with an M. But I never explain that. I just leave it there, you know?
It looks good on the page and the love is still there. And I think that's very important, you know?
Yes, the love is there.
What is the idea, Bruna? Of course, the first issue is coming out now. I think it's getting positive feedback here in the UK as well. When will we see an issue 2? I mean, what's the idea? Are you planning to do this every 6 months, every year, or you see how this will develop? Tell us a bit more about that.
This is a really good question. This is the first edition, but we are definitely aiming to do the second edition next year. So the idea is that we're going to be an annual publication. The first one took a little longer because Rafaela, my partner at the project, and I are not designers. We were not in the editorial world, but we hope the second edition will be faster to do. So yeah, if everything goes well, we're going to have a 001 Latin Love magazine, probably towards more the end of 2026. Fingers crossed.
Thank you, Bruna. For more information, go to latimlove.com. That's LATIM love.com. To the US now, where I had the pleasure to speak with the editor-in-chief of Marie Claire US, Nikki Ogunnaike. Over the last 2 years, Nikki brought her personal touch to the beloved media brand. We discussed print, digital, and the magazine plans for 2026. Here is Nikki with more. And Nikki Ogunnaike, welcome to The Stack. You are Marie Claire US Editor-in-Chief. Marie Claire, one of those iconic titles. My first question to you, since when have you been working at Marie Claire?
I've been here for 2 years and some change now. I joined late November 2023. And it was an interesting time to join Marie Claire. Like you said, the brand is iconic. It's a brand that's been around for over 30 years now. It's a brand that's always stood for women of power and purpose and style. But I like to say that when I joined, we had really good bones. We just needed a bit of renovation. If you look like at a brownstone or a home or something of the sort, we just needed a bit of a renovation on the inside. And so when I joined in 2023, that's what I set out to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. And, I grew up with the Brazilian edition of Marie Claire. So for me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was always about a woman who works. There was perhaps a differential of the magazine. I don't know if you agree with me on that one.
Absolutely. When I started at Marie Claire, I was very clear that I wanted it to feel like a group chat of your most ambitious friends, right? So that means that you do care about work, but you also care about politics and you care about beauty and you care about style. But to your point, I think our woman is an unabashedly ambitious woman. She owns that and she cares about her career. She cares about success. She doesn't see ambition as a bad word and she really embraces it.
And tell us a bit more about Marie Claire's presence in the US. I know it has kind of a long history in the country as well. There's been changes, of course, as you said, in recent years. You were inside the magazine for, as you said, about a few years now. So tell us about the digital and print as well, because I know they're still in print. I mean, we need to talk about the wonderful cover by Tiana Taylor, which is fantastic. But tell us a bit more, how do you do the print and digital divide?
Definitely. So we, to your point, we print twice a year. We have a September issue and we have a March issue. Each are sort of, they fall in line with the fashion calendar, essentially. I come from a fashion background, so I think that I will always slightly be oriented around that. But I also have a really solid digital background, and I understand how digital covers are important to the landscape. I see Marie Claire sort of as an ecosystem, and digital covers factor into that ecosystem. So we do them 6 times a year. So it's a mix of print and digital. Each digital issue is focused on a theme. So our upcoming January issue I can speak to is focused around moguls. And that's been the case in the past as well. In the last year that we had that, we've had issues centered around women in sports. We've had issues centered around next gen is another issue that's coming up in November. And so it's a mix of themes that we center the issues around for digital. We also at Marie Claire have a really great live event series called Power Play, which is an invite-only summit where we bring together about 115 women around the country. And we focus on networking and empowerment. And it speaks to all of the things that we care about here at Marie Claire. Community is really, really important to me. Community has always been important to me. And I think it was a thing that I wanted to bring back in a more nuanced way when I started at Marie Claire. So Power Play now travels around the country. We've done it in LA, we've done it in Atlanta and Philadelphia. And that's just been an opportunity, I think, to bring Marie Claire to the readers rather than like the readers having to come to us.
How important are those events for the brand and for the magazine in general?
I think they're really important. Events in general, I think, are incredible calling cards for brands. You know, Power Play is a spinoff of Power Trip that Anne Fullen-Wilder, former editor-in-chief of Marie Claire, invented. And it's just been a great opportunity for the reader to get to know us, for us to get to know the reader, to really make noise and sort of brand build and build community in real life.
Well, and talking about someone that is making noise at the moment is Teyana Taylor. And, you know, I've read your fabulous interview with her, and she is the woman of the moment, I would say. So tell us a bit more. She is indeed the cover girl for the latest Marie Claire imprint, right?
Yes, Teyana Taylor is our latest cover girl. That's our Changemakers issue. And Teyana is a changemaker in of herself. Obviously, she, started working when she was 16. And she has not stopped. And I think that she's really coming into a very incredible season for her. Obviously, she's in One Battle After Another, Paul Thomas Anderson's film, but she's also in
Love the
television. It's absolutely incredible film. And I'm really happy that Teyana has been able to show off all sides of her. And I think that in that film, she does it really well. She's also in a TV show with Ryan Murphy called All's Fair. And so she's just having such a great time right now in her career. And I hesitate to say it's a moment because I don't think that you can define Teyana in just a moment. Like, she is here for the long game. And I think that's what makes her a change maker and why I was really excited to have her on the cover. I had the pleasure of doing the interview. It's also an episode of my podcast, Nice Talk. And so I think that also shows what we're able to do at Marie Claire, which is use these opportunities when we speak to change makers like Teyana and really put it on all of the platforms that we have. So not just print, not just digital, but also in audio form.
I was curious as well about Marie Claire. What's your relationship with the other international titles? I mean, is there kind of a collaboration between all of those versions?
Yeah, there's definitely a collaboration. We work with Marie Claire International, and they sort of connect us to all of the various Marie Claires around the world, really. So, Marie Claire France or Marie Claire China, like, we all are able to work together and really learn from each other, which is, I think, a really special way of continuing on that ecosystem that I spoke of before.
You hinted about the January issue. I mean, I was wondering in general, are you optimistic for 2026 and Marie Claire?
I mean, I have to be optimistic, right? I think that falling for pessimism, it is obvious how one could, but I think because I believe in the future of media, because I believe in print, because I believe in digital, because I believe in Marie Claire, I am optimistic for the future.
And even, Nikki, of course, you have a fashion background as well. I mean, even the latest seasons, there's been so many new designers, so much change and still to come as well. I mean, isn't it quite an exciting moment for fashion men, you would say, as well?
Of course. And that's one reason to be optimistic, right? Like there's so much change, and change is good and change can be exciting. I think when you look at debuts of Louise Trotter at Bottega or Mathieu Blaze at Chanel, like there is optimism and verve and excitement there. And so that, lights a fire under me. Like I remember when Alessandro Michele got to Gucci and just the excitement of editors when they came back to the office and they were just like so thrilled to have something new. And we haven't really had an experience like that in a really long time up until this last season. So just seeing all the debuts, seeing the incredible clothes, and then seeing them on celebrities in real life. Like I can't wait for things to hit stores so I can go and touch and see them and try them on in person.
And then you can read it all in Marie Claire as well.
And then you can see it all in Marie Claire.
Thank you, Nikki. And for more, go to marieclaire.com. And now, as we approach the end of the year, it's great to welcome back to the stack Jen Bilton, who compiles every year the Media Shapers Report, looking at the people shaping the media business today. Curious? Find out now with Jen, who is on the list. Jen Bilton, welcome back to the stack. It's been a while, but glad to see you here in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll introduce you as the Managing Director for West End Marketing and Brand Lab Research. And I love the briefings you send about the state of media in general. But there's one interesting one that we're going to focus today, which is the latest Media Shapers Report. First of all, give us an introduction. What is the Media Shapers Report?
Well, the Media Shapers has grown into something a lot bigger than it originally was. It originally started out as a bit of fun to get media insiders, so people who work inside the business, to talk about the books and the films and the TV series about media that shaped the consumer's view of what we actually do in this business. It started out like that, but then we repeated it again and had this thread. We thought it was actually a very good way of people inside the business explaining what they actually do, who they are looking for, and who they think are the individuals who are shaping the business. And the background thought behind it all is that although the robots are coming to get us, it is still people who have at least some input into the business. But that's actually one of the big themes which we'll talk about later on. But that's the background to it all. And also it covers one of the other points being that I think many media commentators on the outside, when they think of media, think of news. News is a relatively small part. There's consumer magazines and the big engine room of it all, which is business to business, that really drives things along.
And of course, there are a lot of numbers in the report as well. And the B2B, as you mentioned, is doing incredibly well. There's growth year on year. So tell us, what does that involve actually when it comes to media B2B?
B2B covers the most. It's peaky and trophy because of travel changes and COVID and so on, is live events. Mm-hmm. So live events is a speciality of B2B, or one element of it, but most B2B companies, where they are talking about their own industry, it ranges from, there are still magazines there, although magazines are dropping out of B2B more quickly than any other sector. But it's business services, it's consultancy, and each company providing quite a different service, but for a very specific target market.
And one thing, though, when you look at the Media Shapers Report, I think there's kind of a headline there. No more heroes anymore. Yes. I get it, but you have to explain, which is, is it a sad thing, perhaps?
It is. Well, basically, I wanted to get the Stranglers album cover on the introduction to the report, but I think it sums it up. And also, it's a question. It's no more heroes anymore, question mark. And I think there are two factors. One is that our industry insider respondents clearly think that the dominant people shaping media are either really rather boring, like the big tech entrepreneurs, or they are more nasty and disruptive than in the past. And Elon Musk and Donald Trump, who dominates the survey, we'll come on to that in a minute, are the prime examples. That's one element to it. But also the old-style media mogul, the Citizen Kane of the past, presiding over a trawling, the Murdochs, yes, although he's come back as well. He faded out in the last couple of years. But presiding over what is often a news-led empire and what we call micro-shapers. There are people who are very important, but within their own community, their own vertical, and they exert a lot of influence over a market which is fragmenting. That's another key theme about how the whole media market is fragmenting into smaller and smaller, deep vertical communities.
And the number one media shaper, it is Donald Trump, as you said. But perhaps it's not just because he's the president of the US, but it's the way he uses social media. He's very... there is something different there. It's not just because of the fact that he's the president of the US, although it helps.
Yes, and he has a great interest and influence in media, but we have fed him. We've given him the oxygen to do it. And there's a quote, if you don't mind, I'll please use some of the quotes. Here's one. The bottom line is that Trump is a narcissistic monster whom we have been partly responsible for creating and sustaining. He fuels headlines, boosts rating, commands global attention. His tactics, ranging from relentless self-promotion and fact distortion to open hostility towards independent journalism, have undermined press freedom, warped public discourse, and emboldened authoritarian tendencies worldwide. So he is a monster, but is a monster that we partly created in the media.
Absolutely, because, we have to cover every single comment he does. But I think journalists also have to be smart and how they portray that as well, in a way, right?
Yes, and what is interesting, we've mentioned Murdoch. Murdoch featured quite heavily 4 years ago, but opinions about him were polarised between a satanic figure to actually the patron saint of paid content. That here was someone who understood the value of content. Some of it might be quite dubious, but he stood up for it. He then went into the background as other people came to the fore. Big tech in particular came to the fore in the last couple of years. And the headlines were about which wife he was on to next, about how to divide the business empire up. It was Succession on steroids. But this year, and it came right at the end of the polling period, this year when Trump said he was going after Wall Street Journal and Rupert personally to the tune of $10 billion, that he's suddenly come back to the fore again. So we've got these two rather unpleasant characters themselves fighting each other out in a sort of Aliens versus Predator or Godzilla versus King Kong. Nobody likes either of them particularly, but there's a fascinating battle going on there.
And it's interesting, of course, big tech is very much present in the rest of the top 5, but someone like Jeff Bezos, he's not on the top 5. And he's not big tech as well. I think it's kind of more traditional. He bought, of course, the Washington Post, but he's not in the top 5.
No, he's faded into the background a bit, but now is coming to the fore once more. Apparently, he bought it personally, so it's not part of Amazon, and he hasn't really interfered in the editorial. He's given suggestions as to how to increase the footprint and its scope. But I think he's coming back in because he's beginning to get interested again in, and also as a comment, a footnote, books are in their DNA. They understand books and understand publishing. And essentially they started out as a book company and are still very important and very dominant, but they understand print as well. So he's a really intriguing character, but who does everything at very tight margin and at massive scale. And if it isn't massive, but he's now in the wings and is ready to come back in with retail media. So retail media is a big threat to established media in terms of where the ad dollars go. So the big retailers who have their own databases, their own direct relationships with their consumers are getting money out of the big brands and are destabilizing the whole advertising market. So he's a really intriguing character who's in the background at the moment, but is coming to the fore.
Could be top 5 next year. Who knows?
Be, yes.
And one topic I want to talk to you as well, and it relates, I presume, to number 2 in the list, which is Sam Altman, is AI, because I don't know, I have it's a personal opinion, I'm not an expert on that, But do you think sometimes even the way the media is covering that, the AI is a little bit overhyped? Because as you said, there is in the future, I think, it's not going to be your usage of AI, but your usage of people as well.
Yes, I think it is overhyped. I think that there is still an existential threat there, and publishers' own views as to the pros and cons, again, are polarised. I think polarisation is another big theme of this year's survey, of people having very different views, and also financially, some are winning, some are losing. But AI, the consumer research, all emphasises that fewer people are using AI tools and AI agents on a regular basis than we think. And they have more concerns about its validity and whether it's hallucinating than perhaps we think. So I think we as the media have panicked about it, but at the end of the day, it's still massively important.
I have a question. In the report, when you ask those people in media, what about magazines? I mean, what are their views? I mean, I know the market is declining, but not by a lot, according to numbers that I saw in the report. Is there still strength in the world of magazines for you?
Yeah, there is. I mean, again, you've got to dig into the detail, and it fragments and you get subsectors. But the mainstream titles, so the big weeklies, the TV listings titles, the women's weeklies, the big titles that were, again, the engine room for the magazine business, have been steadily declining, some more quickly than others, and there have been some closures. So if you put those to one side, there is a print revival going on with smaller publishers in smaller verticals, and they're building communities and using digital tools to develop a membership offer. Whether that is, and when we come on to the brands, Hearst is very adept at doing this, and Good Housekeeping is their big model at the moment. It's a fairly big title. So
they still sell quite a lot of prints every
yes,
copies, yeah.
So print, and you see even digital-only players who are backing into print, that print still has a value as being the real thing. There are a number of different threads to it. One is of it being an oasis from a 24/7 digital world where people, for mindfulness reasons, do it, which is why the juvenile market is very buoyant, because parents want their kids to read. So that's one very specific area. But at the end of the day, people think that a print magazine is the real thing. They are going up in price a lot as a result. They're lower frequency, so there are many monthlies which are defrequencing down to 8 issues to quarterly. But print is becoming a bigger premium element of very many different markets.
Because I have to say, when I read your West End briefings as well, which are excellent, it always makes me feel quite optimistic, because there's always news about launches. Of course, there are closures, there are problems in the industry. I'm not saying everything's perfect, but it is exciting. I think there's still, in the luxury sector as well, I would say there are a lot of interesting launches as well.
Yes, the luxury sector. And then another sector which is very buoyant is collectibles, partworks and collectibles of, build your own Starship Enterprise out of matchsticks and football cards, where collectibles, where you're collecting and exchanging trading cards. So there's a whole nother area there, which is physical, it's print, and it needs, one of the big issues is having retail access, that the retail universe in the UK of retailers who want to display newspapers, magazines, and one-shots and collectibles. But one-shots and collectibles are gobbling up some of the mainstream magazine space at the moment.
Gina, I just want to ask you, I mean, you did mention Hearst, the publisher there, but were there any interesting publishers or names of titles even that were mentioned quite a lot in your report? Anything you were surprised, or you can even say perhaps were not mentioned and you were a bit surprised?
No, we divided it up between newspapers, consumer and B2B. B2B, there were a few surprises there, but say on news, there were 6 key news brands. So The Economist, the FT, The Guardian, Mill Media, so who are producing these local newsletters. The New York Times, of course, which is the poster child of digital news delivery, and The Atlantic. So we have got sort of two Americans in there. So those weren't really surprising. What was surprising is how the consumer publishers watch them, that they are looking at what they're doing. Some of them are doing better than others. And I still have a personal view about The Guardian that I don't know in 5 years' time on an MBA course whether it's going to be an example of a slow-motion car crash or one of the most clever reinventions. And I think the finances of The Guardian are a bit dodgy, but it's come up with some very interesting models. So then we get into the secondary, and we divided them into two tiers as to simply how many mentions they actually have got. So here's one I simply hadn't heard about before, which is Shit You Should Care About, which is...
I didn't know as well. I should check that out.
Which sort of cuts through to tell you what the things you should be looking at and should be keeping an eye on in our world. So there were little surprises. And also, when we get into, we call them lone voices. Lone voices are either journalists who operate on their own, very often on Substack, or YouTube. There is one particular lone voice who highlights the difference between long form and short form, which I think there's another big dynamic there, that Netflix is being stuffed by TikTok. So the first generation of media disruptors like Spotify and Netflix, essentially long form, are being stuffed by short form operators. He goes to hotspots where there are riots, and typically with some of the immigration riots. But he says that the BBC is soundbite, and he produces videos that are an hour and a half, 2 hours long, but vox pop and talking on the streets. But lone voices, and again, the fragmentation of our media business from the big media companies who can fund investigative reporting, as opposed to the lone voices who are more about opinion rather than hard facts and analysis.
Thank you very much, Jean. And if you're interested in the report and more, you can email him on info@wessenden.com. That's WESSENDEN.com. And now we play a highlight from the great Monocle Fashion podcast, where we hear from the editor-in-chief of a magazine curated by, Blake Abbie, to tell us why he chose to work with Danish designer Cecilie Bansen for his latest issue.
With Cecilia, it was really important for me to celebrate a female voice. That was something that we really wanted to prioritize. We have had many male voices within the legacy of A Magazine, and just, a couple female voices. Obviously, Chitose Abbie and Martine Sitbon, Brian Quino, Grace Wells Bonner. But there are so few female voices within the industry of fashion that was something that we were really, really wanting to make sure that we had this year. And Cecilia is celebrating her 10th anniversary, and so it made a lot of sense.
That's such a good point. And in my conversation with her, she kept referring back to this idea of femininity as one of her biggest strengths, and really indulging in it and embracing it rather than trying to be like other designers. So did you find that in the process of working with her that it was all about celebrating femininity and this softness in the shoots, and did it come out on the pages, do you think?
Yeah, I do think that we have a real strong narrative of womanhood and femininity within the magazine, but it's something that I think that women designers don't necessarily want to be fully attached to. So there is a complete balance between that and also them just being designers and having a creative point of view. But that said, there's incredible conversations. One of the first stories we shot actually was when Cecilia went to Tokyo with her son, Ib. And it was his first time visiting the city. And just that, the notion of mother and child and opening up a new world to the child, the idea between that relationship between mother and child was very kind of present throughout the magazine. And I think that is really something that comes through in terms of femininity. Otherwise, obviously the clothes are beautiful, the clothes are feminine, but I don't think necessarily we needed to emphasize that because it's visually already there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. What are some of this? Every story feels quite personal and intimate. So I wonder, was there a particular one that really struck a chord with you or that you enjoyed working on?
I mean, that's what's so amazing about this issue, or actually the project, I should say, is that we have the joy to learn about someone in an incredibly intimate way. And it took Cecilia a few months actually to start to open up to the possibility, even if we did shoot with Ib, in Tokyo, to be able to kind of like understand her inner workings. That came like a few months into the process. We had a meeting at our offices and she had her phone on the table, and the phone was covered in stickers, like Pokemon stickers and stickers that said posh, that Abe would have put on there. And it really kind of is such a contrast to maybe the aesthetic of the brand and the person that Cecilia puts out there. And so that kind of intimate process was really interesting. And that's my goal at the end, was to kind of infuse those moments of unexpectedness throughout the magazine, so it felt a bit more real. But there is one story that I think was really beautiful, where she asked her partner, Cecilia asked Dan, her partner, to offer these incredible sketches that he makes. He's an illustrator, and rather than keeping a diary of words, he does these incredible sketches at the end of every day or every couple days of what happened in the day, and they're so funny. You see Dan and Cecilia living and arguing, and Ib growing up from a baby. And there's one where he says, like, "Look at me, Dad, you're gonna be as cool as me one day," or something to that effect. And it really gives you an incredible insight into her personal world that I don't think you see through the brand. And she doesn't have an Instagram herself as well, so you don't really know who she is as a person, and that was really important. But they are also very frank about their relationship and how it was not easy early on when Sarah was younger and Carla was starting TG Corso Como and was working in many capacities also at the Elia Foundation. And they talk about them finding themselves again later on. And that was a really beautiful kind of parallel, I guess, to the kinds of conversations that maybe Cecilia had with her family. And yeah, that was really beautiful. I mean, there's so many stories.
It's always hard to choose, no, but those two are such beautiful examples. And having seen the magazine, it really does come out, like the intimacy and how vulnerable and how much they opened up. And it must be really interesting from your side as well, because you're the editor, but there's a little bit of a psychology involved as well, because you need to make, I guess, to achieve that kind of result, you really need to spend time with people and make them feel safe to open up and be vulnerable.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, in a sense, it's almost you become a psychologist as well as an actor, because you have to, in one way, reflect the person, but also be able to think like them. And that's so fascinating as an approach. And I revel in it, which is it's great.
Amazing. Just to end, what's next for you? I don't think you can tell us quite yet who's going to be the next co-editor, curator, but what have you been up to? What are you looking forward to when you look ahead in the new year?
Yeah, well, I'm calling you from Shanghai because we just celebrated another edition of our 25 years exhibition that we shared with you earlier this year in March. Which is really wonderful. And we did a kind of two-part exhibition here where we had the A Magazine exhibition celebrating the 25 years, and we also celebrated 20 seasons of Labelhood, which is an incredible incubator of fashion designers here in Shanghai. And I selected 24 different incredible fashion designers who are of Chinese descent, whether they're based here in the mainland of China or around the Chinese diaspora around the world. And that was a really incredible project where we were able to kind of like dig dig deep and explore a world that I think that is not so known to us, the world. So hopefully we'll be able to bring that exhibition outside of China to share their stories. And then, we have an incredible special project coming out earlier next year, a new issue coming out later in the spring. So as you said, I cannot share quite yet, but there's a lot of things happening on our side, which I'm very excited to share soon enough.
Thank you, Blake. And you can listen to Monocle Fashion on monocle.com. You can also check out a Magazine Curated By.com. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks to our editor, Christy O'Grady. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com or subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.